Aloha. We are convening the 10 a.m. Thursday, February 1st agenda for the Committee on Transportation. I have Representative Chris Todd, current chair of the Committee on Transportation. And maybe we'll start, because it's our first hearing of the year, just going around the room, introducing ourselves, starting with my vice chair.
Aloha, Representative Darius Kila, Vice Chair of the House Committee on Transportation.
Okay, and then you want to go with that end down? Yeah.
Good morning, Representative Tyson Miyake.
Good morning, Micah Ayu.
Good morning, I'm Lauren Matsumoto from Mililani.
Luke Evelyn from Kauai.
Richard Onishi from Hilo.
Okay, I think that's all of us. So we're going to get into our agenda, and it should be pretty straightforward today. If I talk too fast, it's because I had coffee this morning, and I never drink coffee, so bear with me on that one. But yeah, we can get right to it. We'll open up with HB 1622 relating to flooding.
Thank you, Chair. We have one testifier on HB 1622. Gardenis Pintor in support.
Yeah, and I don't believe she's available to testify. Is there anyone else? What is it? Oh, my bad. Is there anyone else who'd like to testify on this measure? If not, we're going to move on to the next measure, since there's no one to ask questions of, unless anyone's got any burning priorities. No, we're good? Okay, next we're going to move on to HB 1932, relating to the Department of Transportation. And for the testifier list, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. HB 1932, first testifier Luke Sarves from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, providing comments on Zoom.
I see him up there. There we go.
Morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. The department stands on its written testimony, offering comments and be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier, Kevin Moore from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, offering comments on Zoom.
He's back up. We're together.
Okay. Up next, Director Ed Sniffen from the Department of Transportation in support.
Chair and Vice Chair, members, Ed Sniffen from Hawaii DOT stands in support.
Thank you, Director. Up next, Sabrina Taylor from Signature Aviation in support on Zoom.
Aloha. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be with you guys this morning. I'm Sabrina Taylor. I represent Signature Aviation as its Vice President of Airport Relations and Strategic Programs. First off, let me say as well that I stand by my written testimony. However, I'd like to take a few minutes just to make some brief comments this morning.
Okay, just as a real quick thing though, but if you could just be relatively brief. We usually give a 2-minute cap, but I didn't really say that at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Signature Aviation is a commercial aeronautical tenant of the state of Hawaii's Department of Transportation at 6 airports, and we provide fuel services to airlines and handle private jet operations. We're in over 200 locations worldwide. As a long-term tenant, we're working with the state of Hawaii's Department of Transportation on a master plan for redevelopment of our facilities, and we've committed to an investment in the range of $40 million. It was during this process that I learned that the DLNR would also need to review and approve our lease agreement, and therefore I'm just expressing Signature's strong support for House Bill 1932, which seeks to streamline the process for reviewing and approving the lease of land that the DOT holds title to at its Hawaii airports. Thank you very much for considering my comments and appreciate your time this morning.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other testifiers, are there anyone in the room that would like to provide testimony on HB 1932? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions for any of the testifiers? Yeah, Rep. Onishi.
Yeah, for DOT Director. Thanks for being here. It says in the change, the amendment that's being made, sell, assign, exchange, transfer, convey, lease, or otherwise dispose of, or encumber any real property, personal, mixed property, etc. What would that process be?
So we would set up our own process within DOT for a public process. Right now, the BLNR provides that public process to go through to make sure that the public can comment, express any concerns, and challenge any acquisitions or commercial operations that we might recommend. So we would set up our own process within DOT to do so.
Okay, so if you're going to sell, assign, exchange, transfer, convey land, would the legislature have to approve that?
Not at this time. Not in the way that the operations work right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rep, are you?
So I see the condemnation section and the acquire. Is this acquiring through condemnation, or can you use multiple
Multiples.
streams?
Yes.
Okay, and then do you have any immediate plans for lands right now, or is this just in anticipation of?
Yeah. No immediate plans or no change in operations based on or that's hinging on this.
Okay.
What we're looking at is ensuring that we can make our processes more efficient. Most of the operations that we run through BLNR are leases in airports or in harbors. If we can pull that off the docket for BLNR, we can make their docket a lot more efficient. Plus, we don't have to wait the 2 weeks throughout. I will say BLNR and the DLNR has been amazing partners, trying to help us out to move things forward as quickly as possible. But I think we'd be more efficient doing this.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Members, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, HB 1981. And I think we have no one signed up to testify, so obviously a very necessary bill. Members, have any questions for nobody? No? We're going to move on to HB 1997.
Thank you, Chair. HB 1997. First up, we have Michael Angelo from DCCA, Division of Consumer Advocacy, providing comments in person.
Vice Chair, my name is Nick Johnson. I'm here for my Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, stand on written comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Standing on written comments. Up next, Mark Glick from the Hawaii State Energy Office, providing comments in person. Seeing nobody. Up next, Chair Leo Ascension from the Public Utilities Commission, providing comments in person.
Vice Chair, members of the committee, Leo Sanchez, Chair of the PUC, will stand on a written testimony providing comments.
Thank you, Chair. Up next, we have Douglas S. Adams from the Department of Research and Development for the County of Hawaii in support. Up next, we have David Molinaro from the Hawaii Center for Advanced Transportation Technologies in support, providing testifying in person.
Good morning, Chair Todd, Vice Chair Keela, committee members. David Molinaro, the Director for the Hawaii Center for Advanced Transportation Technologies. Stand on my written testimony in support of this bill. I'll answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Sherry Pollack from 350 Hawaii in opposition. Up next, Chris Nakagawa from Young Brothers providing comments. Up next, Henry Curtis from Life of the Land providing comments in person. Lastly, Stanley Osserman providing in support. And if there's anyone else in the room that would like provide testimony on HB 1997, seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, HB 2267, relating to highway safety.
Thank you, Chair. HB 2267. Up first, Louis Salaveria from Department of Budget and Finance providing comments. Next, we have Michelle Costa from the Judiciary State of Hawaii providing comments. Up next, Department of Director of Transportation Ed Sniffen in support. Thank you, Director. Up next, Stassen Tanaka from the Honolulu Police Department in support on Zoom.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Major Stason Tanaka from HPD's Traffic Division. We stand in support of the bill, and I'm available for any questioning.
Thank you. Lastly, Catherine Chase, President of the Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety and Support. That are all the registered testifiers. Anybody in the room like to provide testimony for HB 2267? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions on HB 2267? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, HB 2071, relating to photo red light imaging detector systems.
Thank you, Chair. Up first, we have Director Ed Sniffen for the Department of Transportation in support.
Thank you, Chair. Stand in support.
Next, we have Victor Ramos, an individual in support. Seeing no other registered testifiers, anyone in the room like to provide support or testimony on HB 2071? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions on HB 2071? Okay, Rep. Yu.
Director, I have a few questions. Do you guys have any numbers about how many tickets that are being issued, like, are being contested right now, or like the pay rate on the tickets?
Yeah, so about 300 of them were contested for red lights.
Is that like do you know the percentage of
Yeah,
that? Is that
very
low
low
or is that
num-
high?
very, very low number.
Okay, so most people are just paying?
Yeah. most
Okay,
people are paying.
okay. And are you having problem, like, as far as the tickets that are being contested, like, what is the issue?
Some of them were the owner. I mean, we're ticketing the owner, right?
Yeah.
Some of them, they didn't own the vehicle at the
Okay.
time, so the transfer of title was stuck in the middle. Some of them were stolen cars, and two others, the judge had thrown the case out because the owner said I wasn't driving. So clearly, some education that we have to do on the judiciary side.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to HB 2673 relating to roads.
Thank you, Chair. HB 2673. Up first, we have Tom Yamachika from the Tax Foundation of Hawaii providing comments on Zoom. Thank you. Up next, Raha Ruth Ann Tarles from the Pu'ua'a Community and Road Association in support. Karen Lynn Hoffman, Hawaiian Paradise Park Owners Association in support. Janet Marshall in support. Michael Mentek providing comments. And Eileen O'Hara in support. Seeing no other registered testifiers, anyone would like to provide testimony HB 2673 in the room? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, any questions for anyone? No? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to HB 1538 relating to transportation.
Thank you, Chair. HB 1538. Up first, we have the Insurance Division from the State of Hawaii, DCCA, providing comments in person. Up next, we have Mike Onofredi from the Hawaii Insurance Council providing comments on Zoom.
Hello, Chair Todd, Vice Chair Keela. My name is Mike Onofredi, representing Hawaii Insurance Council. I'm also a credentialed actuary. I'll just offer some additional comments. We're standing on our testimony, again, offering comments really to alert the legislature that the premium increases from the auto minimum limits changes may be substantial, and they will impact those that are perhaps least able to afford them. We're in an environment right now where the cost of auto insurance is going up, mostly because of the increase in the number of safety features in vehicles, which means every time there's an accident, it's just that much more expensive to repair a vehicle. Things like cameras, sensors, and all those other things that hopefully will reduce accident frequency in the future really haven't done so quite yet, but they are certainly costing insurers and their customers more to repair. And I'm available for any questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Onofredi. Up next, we have Davin Ayagi from Turo providing comments. Up next, we have Annie Makampagal, American Property Casualty Insurance Association in opposition.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair Annie Makapagal, on behalf of American Property Casualty Insurers Association. We'd like to respectfully oppose the measure and echo the sentiments of Mike at Hawaii Insurance Council as well. And we'd also like to point out that if you take a look at our testimony, the insurance, motor vehicle insurance, of the rate of uninsured motors is on a trend for going down, and we'd hate to see that trend go back up. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I hope I didn't butcher your name, so I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's good.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Okay. Up next, we have Evan Oye from the Hawaii Association for Justice in support in person.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Evan Oye on behalf of the Hawaii Association for Justice. We do stand in strong support of this measure. The motor vehicle insurance minimums haven't been increased in over 25 years, which has led to almost a 50% reduction in consumer protection. Hawaii is actually one of only 6 states remaining that provide 20,000 or require less than 20,000 or $20,000 or less in minimum coverage. So which that kind of puts us towards the bottom of this nationally, and Hawaii's always been a pretty pro-consumer protection state. The current low minimums are pretty inconsistent with a substantial a rising cost of living and medical inflation. Most medical bills for accidents of medium or severity often exceed $50,000, especially if there's an emergency or trauma incidents involved. The current $20,000 in insurance often policy limits often pays for just a fraction of the damages caused, and leaves the victim bearing the cost of their injuries, which they had no control over at most times. In turn, this substantial increase in consumer protection, will outweigh any premium cost increases associated. So ultimately, accident victims, we want to provide them with a little bit more consumer protection for both, Hawaii drivers and pedestrians alike. So, happy to answer any questions, but thank you for the opportunity to testify, Chair.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Matt Sujimura from State Farm in opposition.
Aloha, Chair Todd, Vice Chair Keela, members of the committee, Matt Sujimura on behalf of State Farm Insurance. You have our written testimony, and I'll echo the same sentiments from HIC as well as APCIA, but I do want to point out we are in opposition specifically to Section 6 of the bill, which would increase the premiums. The concern here, as kind of already stated, is really a cost of living implication here. It's the fact that if we were to just look at this as an auto insurance increase in a vacuum, it wouldn't be so bad. But when we're looking at it in the entire scope and we really zoom out, the cost of living here in Hawaii has been increasing. It's been on the rise. This will only add on to that and exacerbate the issue. And to be honest, I think the people in this room, we probably wouldn't feel the impact of this. It's the people that are out there on constituents and the other people who are on fixed income, who are struggling to get by on 2 jobs and things like that. They just will be pushed to the limits. And the vast majority of people who do purchase minimum coverage, that's all they can afford. And so really to increase that would push them on the brink to be able to be in a position where they would have to choose between purchasing auto insurance or potentially putting food on the table for their family. So that's kind of the real implication, the real world implication of this outside of just the insurance realm. But again, if the committee feels inclined to pass this bill, we have included 2 amendments. One, to push back the effective date, and that's really just to ensure that the appropriate rates are passed by and approved by DCCA Insurance Division. Again, because this would cause an increase in cost, it would have to require an increase in premiums, which requires DCCA approval. The second is a waiver request. Basically, when insured sign for the policies, they can opt to purchase the the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, or they can opt out to do that. So we just want to clarify that piece. So we have a second amendment there, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Seeing no other testifiers registered, did anyone in the room would like to provide testimony on HB 1538? Seeing none, Chair.
All right, members, do you have any questions on this measure, HB 1538?
I have questions, Chair. You want
go right by you first?
I guess I'll ask a couple people. So, Mike, are you still on?
Yes.
What is the impact on premiums to go from 2040 to 5000? Do you have the information?
Yeah, so in reviewing some rate filings are publicly available, and reviewing the filing for the largest auto insurer in the state, which is Geico, it would increase the bodily injury liability limits by 69%, and the uninsured and underinsured motorist, I have the number in my testimony, let me take a quick scan of it, by a greater number than 69%. It would be UMUIM, it's 150 and 270% for for underinsured motorist. Okay, rephrase that. For bodily injury, for uninsured motorist, it's the same as bodily injury, so 69%. For underinsured motorists, it's 150%. My company, Island Insurance, though the range of those changes is a little bit higher than what we have, but it's consistent.
Okay, so just hypothetically, if I pay $500 for insurance a year, I don't know if that's high or low. What
For
am I
minimum
looking at?
customers-
What am I
Oh, yeah.
looking at after we pass this? Just a rough estimate.
So assuming you have un and underinsured motorist coverages along with bodily injury, property damage, and liability, the increase would probably be between about $175 and $200 a year.
Okay. And do you have any information from your policyholders about their ability to pay or their want to pay, or do you have any of that information? Okay.
Yeah, we don't really gather. That's sort of more credit related,
Okay.
and we don't get into that at all. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, thank you, Chair. I'm good.
Rep. Onishi?
Yes, I have another question for you. So, do you have any information of the people that you covered under auto insurance? How many people actually are at the minimum? And how many people would be at the new limit that are already purchasing 50 to 100?
So Island sells through independent agents, and we're a little different than the rest of the market, but I do have experience from a prior life at AIG Hawaii. So Island currently, our minimum limits customers are about 17% of our customer base. So in really rough terms, that's going to be a little more than 4,000 policies. When I was with AIG Hawaii, we were more of a direct writer. We had lots of TV ads, and we were catering towards the minimum limits customers. And our book of business at the time was more than a third minimum limits. And in some years, it would be closer to 40%, depending on economic conditions and everything else. And at one point, we probably had 85, 90,000 customers. So if I were to make a real ballpark guess overall in the state, the proportion of minimum limits customers will be in excess of 20%, and probably at most would be 30% to a third.
So what year were you with AIG?
Oh, this goes back many years. It was 2008. But
When limits were higher?
Limits were the same. 2040 was the minimum.
Well, I thought I saw testimony that gave limits and how it changed over the number of years.
Yeah, the limits were changed first, I believe, in 1993, and then again in 1998.
Okay. Chair, if I could call up someone else?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Evan, did you talk about limits before? The change in limit? Could you summarize that for us?
Yeah, so just to touch base on some of the history of it, the rates haven't been changed since 1998, so that's where we kind of come from, the $25,000 range. In 1985, I actually believe it was around 30 to 30,000, and then they actually lowered the limits to the current minimums during 1998 in order to hit where we are at. I think there was certain factors in regards to insurance affordability at that time, but now with the proliferation of insurance availability, I think that that issue has been more or less resolved, and we were looking to provide a little bit more insurance for everybody. So from that standpoint, that's where we got the 25 years. It is from a historical standpoint, it actually decreased to this amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I should ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
So, we heard testimony that the costs for insurance has risen because the costs associated with vehicle accidents have risen. But if you are, say, your property damage is $10,000, and cars are more expensive and all the features in it, who pays that amount over $10,000?
Who pays that amount over $10,000? So I think that, with your minimums being that amount, then you would be essentially stuck with the difference at that point, from my understanding. Anything that's over, it's very similar to the bodily injury BI, is where if your amount is not covered under the $20,000, you may get stuck with that remaining amount of medical bills, or any kind of injury that overseeds the required minimums, from my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
So similar to property damage in that instance.
Okay. So, in the background, Mr. I'm sorry. Onifredi, you were disagreeing with that?
Yeah, so for property damage liability, as an insured, you have the ability to buy collision coverage. And if the property damage liability coverage is not adequate to repair your car, then the collision coverage would step in. If you don't buy collision coverage, you do have an option, but it's probably not a great one, which would be small claims court for any differences. But I just wanted to make sure that's clear. It's not necessarily that it's out of pocket for the insured whose car is damaged by an at-fault driver.
Okay, but if you created your own damage, who pays?
Then you would have collision coverage that you would purchase on your own behalf.
If you purchased it.
Right.
But the law doesn't require you to purchase it, correct?
It does not.
So can you tell us how many people who have the minimum coverage have collision coverage?
Yeah, the percentage, sorry, I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, it's in excess of 70%. One of the things to be mindful of is that if you have a loan on your vehicle, the lender will require both collision, and it's called comprehensive or other than collision, for things like theft and other sorts of damages.
Does your loan company also require it to have higher coverages for bodily injury?
If you lease your vehicle, some lease agreements will require higher liability limits.
Okay.
If you just purchase, I'm not aware that lending agreements require higher liability limits in that instance.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question for Evan. Evan, do you have any numbers about affordability?
In terms of premium cost?
Yeah, as all of these people will be able to purchase, or are you seeing that people fall off from just not even or driving without insurance?
So first of all, I think in our testimony we referenced the current rate that GEICO has at the state, and I think Mr. Onifredi referenced that's the 1.69 insurance factor, which kind of shows you what your rate will look like if you purchase the higher coverage. And so when you take GEICO's base rate of $262, I believe, which on Oahu, and you multiply it by that, I think it comes out to a difference of about $180 or roughly about $15 a month in difference on that at that point. So for an additional $15,000 a month, or $15 a month, you could be looking at an additional $30,000 in coverage, from our understanding of the current, based on the current rate filings. And so I think at that point the trade-off from a public consumer protection standpoint, I think that people would agree to take it for that amount, but that's just I think a policy call at that point.
Thank you, Chair.
Great. Any additional questions? Okay, thanks. That was actually great. So we're going to move on to the next piece of legislation, HB 1539. Before we get to the testifier list, I would note that this bill is virtually identical. So if you did testify on the prior measure, I would recommend either standing on your testimony or addressing any minor differences between the two. Or if you weren't here to testify, then feel free to do so. But let's try to avoid the duplication, since it's almost exactly the same.
Thank you, Chair. So understanding that, moving forward, HB 1539, up first, we have Director Snippen from the Department of Transportation and support. Thank you, Director. Up next, Insurance Division, State of Hawaii, DCCA, providing comments. Up next, Mike. Oh, sorry. I just was looking.
No.
My bad.
Oh, first of all, I'm sorry for being late. I missed the previous bill. But yeah, it's almost identical. Gordon Ito testifying on behalf of DCCA Insurance Division. We offer comments on the bill. And we've, within our testimony, we note the potential increase that would be impacted by the bill. One of the things that we're requesting is with respect to the January 1st, 2027 increase proposed on page 14, lines 13 to 15. We request that, or we suggest that the language may be deleted if the initial increase prior to January 1st, 2027 goes into effect. It will provide time to see the impact as opposed to putting in an automatic increase. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Mike Onofredi from the Hawaii Insurers Council providing comments on Zoom.
We stand on our written testimony offering comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Davin Onyagi for Turo providing comments. Up next, we have Annie Megapal from American Property Casualty Insurance Association opposition. Thank you. Up next, we have Evan Oyu from Hawaii Association for Justice and Support. Thank you. And lastly, Matt Sujimura from State Farm in opposition. Thank you. Seeing no further testimony, anyone in there would like to testify on HB 1539? Seeing none, Chair.
Oh, Rep, you?
I have a question for DCCA. What kind of education or outreach do you do to the public to educate them on possibly purchasing higher premiums?
Well, our education in terms of for consumers, regardless of any life. First of all, I heard the discussion questions Rep. Onishi was asking. So one of the quick answers in terms of and in response to your education, we do have a motor vehicle rate comparison sheet on our website, and it provides samples and explanation of the different coverages that people can buy. The basic no fault mandatory minimum coverage of BI, PD, and PIP that's required. But we also give an example of what it would be an average typical motor vehicle policy purchase that is purchased, as well as a comparison of if you bought that policy for, say, one insurance company versus what would your premium be. So we have that motor vehicle rate comparison sheet. We encourage everybody to, every year we publish it. In fact, I think a few weeks ago we issued a press release indicating that we posted the new motor vehicle rate comparison sheet, as well as the homeowners rate comparison sheet, condo rate comparison sheet, and renters rate comparison sheet. And it explains the different coverages, the different options, and provides a typical example of the basic versus an average motor vehicle policy that's purchased. So we do outreach like that. As the fairs and things that we do, we also provide materials. So we do a number of outreaches, press releases every year to educate people.
So if somebody calls, you would give them advice on what kind of coverage to purchase or the amount of coverage?
We wouldn't give them advice or recommendations. We would explain what is the difference, what is your optional, like, for example, uninsured, comprehensive, as the discussion in the prior bill was comprehensive, collision, and to try to make everyone understand that the mandatory minimum is just really the mandatory minimum. I always tell my staff this story about, like, for example, when we had the Manoa floods, and we were at the Disaster Recovery Center. And it was very heartbreaking to hear this student's story when she came up and talked to me. And she said, well, the picture of her car in Manoa Stream, that was her car. Right, and I asked her, what kind of coverages do you have? And she said, well, she had full coverage. But it ended up, she had full coverage where she bought the mandatory minimum. But because she didn't buy comprehensive and collision, the loss of her car was not covered because it was in the middle of Manoa Stream. And so that's the kind of, always our concern to make sure consumers are educated in terms of mandatory minimum. Is really mandatory minimum, and there are other coverages that they should consider purchasing. And as I think Mr. Onofredi mentioned, maybe 70% of the people buy additional coverages, but that on the flip side, that means 30% do not, right? So.
I mean, because we could sit here and legislate like collision and everything, but like, is that what should the legislature be the one telling people that like this is a good idea and through legislation, or are we here just to set some like foundational level of coverage?
Well, that
with
is
the
really
understanding that the coverage is to protect yourself, right? Like the coverage we're talking about here is self-protection. Like people are deciding to are taking the risk every time they get on the road, right? And not have the correct level of coverage.
Oh, and that's really, I think, the public policy decision for the legislature. So, I was at the I started in insurance division in 1993. So I was in the midst of all the challenges back then with respect to motor vehicle and workers' comp. And there was the motor vehicle reform. And what in part the legislature chose to do was create to revise the no-fault system and to create more of an a la carte system. I mean, there were other things within the reform in terms of litigation, and there are other problematic areas that was addressed. Hawaii has one of in terms of motor vehicle, I believe we're in the middle pack of average premium nationwide. So we're fortunate in that respect. But during the reform, it was really changed to an a la carte system. People do have the choice of purchasing additional coverages. Right? And so that's the fine balance in terms of how much do you mandate as the mandatory minimum? Are we going to increase the mandatory minimum? Because as Rep. Wanishi discussion questions, I mean, the cost of repair for property damage, everything's gone up. So is that $10,000 minimum sufficient in this day and time? That's a public policy decision that's best left to the legislature. But on the flip side, there's an increase in costs if we increase the mandatory minimum. And then there's always that fine balance in terms of if we increase the cost of motor vehicle insurance and the mandatory minimum, is it going to create an increase in uninsured rate? Right? There's more people saying we can't afford to buy the new mandatory or additional coverages. So that's a balance, and that's best I think left up to the legislature in terms of whether is this the appropriate time to adjust the mandatory minimum, with understanding that there will be a likely increase in cost.
Okay, I mean, you're here from consumer protection, that's why I'm asking you. But I guess my last question is, do you know how many people like click through the website after you update it every year as far as education, or are you guys just spinning your wheels and no one's going to this website?
There are typically, I think, several hundred people that do click through I haven't gone this year to see how many clicks went through. And in the past, we actually used to buy a full page ad in the Star Advertiser and publish that motor vehicle. And that was the one that was there for many, many years from I think the motor vehicle reform in the 1997 or somewhere. But when I became commissioner in 2010, we created the homeowners rate comparison sheet, and as well as the condo and the renters to provide further education and information to consumers to make up choices.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks. Members, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to HB 1577 relating to motor vehicle towing fees.
Thank you, Chair. HB 1577, we have Mana Moriarty from the DCCA Office of Consumer Protection in opposition.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Morning.
We oppose the measure which would authorize towing companies to recover additional reasonable amounts in an accident involving an overturned vehicle. There are some good reasons, and I'd be happy to discuss one particular example, why this body should not be placing its full faith behind the towing industry's ability to come up with the right decision. But let me walk through the practical consequences of adding in a provision to recover reasonable additional expenses. Your average person involved in a motor vehicle accident involving an overturned car is going to be, number one, probably facing serious injuries. and not thinking about the costs involved in the tow. They may not even know that the police department has ordered a tow of their vehicle, and they may receive an invoice in the mail a month later, perhaps, that says, here you go, you owe $1,000. Your average consumer is not going to know that the tow company has to abide by a reasonableness standard, and they're not going to necessarily know what goes into that. I'm a skeptical sort. I might ask, well, what were their costs? How much time did it take? Do they actually own the vehicles they used for this, or did they have to rent them? But your average consumer is not going to think through that. So the statute itself has already been designed in a way that lays out specific caps, specific amounts, and that avoids the issue posed by a consumer getting a bill for $1,000 and wondering whether it's reasonable. What recourse does the consumer have if they get that bill? They can make a complaint, they can do their own research, they can sue, but it's an uphill battle. And let me give you a reason why this body should not place its full faith behind this industry. This statute was amended in 2020 to require the industry to accept cash, credit, and debit card payments. That law has been routinely and flagrantly ignored by the entire industry, which, to our knowledge, is across the board at this point, it seems, still engaged in demanding cash payment. So I'll leave you with that consideration, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further registered testifiers, anybody in the room would like to testify on HB 1577? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions? Yep, Rep. Ayush.
Go ahead.
Hi, Mona. Does DCCA regulate tow companies?
The Office of Consumer Protection has enforcement authority for violations of the towing laws. So, they became UDAPs, so we can take enforcement action, and they would be subject to penalties under our Unfair Deceptive Acts and Practices law.
So how many claims have you brought against tow companies for not accepting credit card or other forms of payment?
We currently have no active lawsuits against the towing industry.
You just said it was a problem. Why?
Because we have active investigations investigating public complaints about problems within the industry. That's how we get our knowledge. That's how we come to understand what's going on in the industry.
Okay. So how long have you been investigating the tow companies, and why is it still happening?
Number one, there are specific investigations ongoing, and those are not subject to public discussion because they involve non-public information. Number two, this law was amended in 2020. So I think from the beginning, there was probably an opportunity here to educate the public and the industry that simply it hasn't worked as intended because there is a violation. Some people know their rights, and they know that they don't have to pay cash. But really, the reality is when your car is towed, the person in possession of your car is in a superior bargaining position to make demands on you, whether they are legal or not legal. If they make those demands and you need your vehicle back, you might pay it and after the fact file a complaint. So we're looking at a situation where, yeah, there are issues with this industry. Yeah.
Okay, wait, so let me ask my first question again. Does DCCA regulate tow companies?
DCCA, the Office of Consumer Protection, can bring enforcement actions, can investigate,
but you don't do
and file
licensing
lawsuits.
for tow companies? They're not RICO
That's correct,
cases.
and I
Okay.
apologize if I misunderstood
Okay.
the thrust of the question. Yeah, there is no licensing and registration branch for towing companies.
Have you guys ever asked for that authority to license tow companies? Is that something you guys would be interested in?
That
Since
I'm
this
not
problem
aware
seems a
of.
problem? Okay.
So one of the things that in the current regime is that counties have the authority to issue their own towing regulations, and counties have done so. Some counties have not. Honolulu has. And so they have their own towing regulations and their own towing contractors who they engage with. Those towing contractors, regardless of what their contract says, they are subject to the limitations set by state law in this particular regard in everything, but the charges authorized by state law cannot be exceeded.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mona.
Great. Rep. Onishi?
Yes. So you mentioned 2020.
Yes.
That's when the law was changed to require towing companies to accept other than cash.
Correct. Yes.
Did that change also require signage posted at towing companies?
That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer. I know there were some signage requirements. I'd have to get back to you on the scope of those amendments in the 2020, whether they affected signage, but I believe they did.
Okay. Can you also check if that signage included a statement that said if a towing company denies you these alternative methods, that this is where you file a complaint?
I can
Just to
look
make
into
it clear to the consumer that they have a recourse. They can pay in cash, but they should have a recourse, right? And then my second question is the towing charges in this bill. When was it last updated?
I'm going to say 2008, and we can get you the session laws on that. But 2007 and 2008, the legislature revisited the actual amounts set in this statute, and that's the last time that I'm aware of.
Okay. And so do you know if a tow company is called to go to an accident where there is a overturned vehicle, who absorbs those costs? Because it seems this law says you can only charge these fees to the owner, right?
So let me try and understand the question. Is the cost, there would be a cost paid by the consumer for the tow.
Right.
And is the question, what if that cost, what if that charge is not sufficient to cover the company's cost? Is that the question?
Well, I mean, I think like here, right, it has it for mileage traveled, storage, hookup charge, I guess, and a base fee.
Right.
But an overturned vehicle might require a lot more work, right? A lot more time than the $65 base fee.
Sure,
So
I could imagine that situation.
Who
Yeah.
would absorb that cost?
So if there's a loss and the costs, the charges are not equal to the cost that the company has to eat, the company would, as my understanding, would eat the cost. It's within the legislature's policy prerogative to take another route and set a cost or max cost for cases involving an overturned vehicle.
Right, which is what this is attempting to do, but not necessarily in the correct language.
That's what we're asserting. This is not the way to go about it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mana, I want to clarify, I think we keep talking about accidents, but have you talked about negligence? Like somebody specifically going and putting themselves in harm's way, which is negligence, whether it's off-road or in a predicament, because then I think we keep talking about the accident, but I think there's a lot of negligence. And I don't think it's fair in that capacity for a tow company to eat cost on negligence.
It's an interesting point.
Because nobody told you take your incapable car off-road, then you get stuck. But because you got to get a toll, they cannot recoup these costs.
So there's another thing that may be involved here, which is insurance, right? In many cases, and I don't know if this would apply in cases involving the negligence or the bad intention of the vehicle owner who drives the vehicle off the road. But certainly insurance would cover the costs if the policy applies. So maybe that also factors into the last answer. There is another provision already in the law which allows for recovery of reasonable amounts in cases involving an excavation of a vehicle off-road. That's already in the law. So I think that would cover some of the situations that you're talking about. It does, in OCP's view, pose the same potential problems for consumers because that law allows the tow company to send you the invoice, and you have to figure out, as a consumer with no knowledge of the industry, whether this is reasonable or not.
But in the case that is reasonable, who is to argue the cost of it? Does that make sense? In the case that if the cost is reasonable, there is no argument.
Yes, I agree. So if you've got companies operating in good faith and sending out a reasonable cost estimate, then you don't have problems. But who is it right now that would bear the risk? Certainly, we think consumers are going to bear the risk, the entire risk of the company going out and sending out a patently unreasonable invoice, or an invoice that it's just really hard to tell if this is reasonable.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Chair.
I guess I have a problem with this discussion now. Like, the consumer doesn't know any cost that's reasonable, right? Like, medical bills, like, how is your argument is like, well, how does the consumer know if that cost is reasonable or any other fee that they pay for anything?
well, I would say this statute, as written, the statute that this bill proposes to amend, takes that calculation out of the consumer's hands. The consumer doesn't have to know whether it's reasonable, because there are bright lines in the statute that say, here's the max cost. And tow companies can recover nothing more than that. So the consumer doesn't have to do that. That burden is not thrust on them.
So, I mean, is that what we should be setting the price for everything then, and telling the consumer, this is what you're going to pay for a loaf of bread, and this is what you're going to pay for milk, and this is what you're going to pay for this? Or is it the consumers and the industry responsible for setting the price on what is reasonable?
I'm certainly not here to address those other questions, but
that's what you're saying, right? Like the consumer, you're saying the consumer is at some kind of disadvantage, and so we need to.
Yeah. So I mean, if I can kind of paraphrase, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the issue is, like, if you're at a supermarket, you have a free market choice available, and the consumer is not at a disadvantage. And if they are at a disadvantage, it means that there's price fixing, there's all kinds of stuff to address that. But in the case they're in a very vulnerable place, they need to recover their car. I think part of the argument you're making that separates this industry from others is that the consumer is already entering negotiations at a disadvantage. Is that correct? Or?
That is correct.
Yeah, but I get where you're coming from, though. Okay, that's probably enough on this topic. Okay,
sure.
Thank you, and you're actually very helpful providing that perspective.
Thank you.
If we can move on to HB 1578.
Thank you, Chair. For our last measure, HB 1578, up first, Director Sniffen from Department of Transportation in support. Thank you, Director. Up next, Matson Navigation Company Incorporated in support. Thank you. HB 1, Melissa Palvachek from Hawaii Harbors Users Group in support. Up next, Chris Nakagawa from Young Brothers in support. Up next, Ryan Sakuda from General Contractors Association of Hawaii in support. Lastly, Eliza Talbot from the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii in support. Seeing no other registered testifiers, anybody in the room would like to provide testimony on the measure of HB 1578? Seeing none, Chair.
Okay, members, do you have any questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to recess briefly to allow our members to be here for decision making, and then we'll reconvene. reconvening the Committee on Transportation for the purpose of decision-making on our 10 a.m. Thursday, February 1st agenda. First, we're going to start with HB 1622. The plan is to defer this measure, but we are going to incorporate some of the flood mitigation language into a bill later in the agenda, so I'll keep it intact. The next bill, HB 1932, our plan is to pass out an HD1. We will insert the defective date of July 1st, 3000. I think that's the agreed upon date. We're going to be incorporating the language provided by DLNR. It's in their testimony, and my understanding is it's been kind of agreed upon by all the stakeholders involved. And we're also going to incorporate any necessary technical amendments. Members, do you have any comments or questions prior to taking the vote? Okay, seeing none. Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1932, passing with amendments, the Chair's recommendation as such. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Ayu?
Aye.
Representative Evslin?
Aye.
Representative Kitagawa, excused. Representative Miyake?
Aye.
Representative Onishi?
Aye.
Representative Matsumoto?
Aye.
Chair, your measure is adopted.
Thank you. Moving on to HB 1981 relating to traffic violations. We received no testimony on this. We're going to keep this going to see if, I guess if the county wants money, they should probably testify that they want the money, but they'll have an opportunity in the Judiciary Committee. Otherwise, plan is just to send it forward with a defective date, creating an HD1 using the same defective date in the prior bill and in all future bills.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1981 to pass with amendments, noting the presence of all members and the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa. Are there any members voting to vote with reservations or no? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
Thank you. Moving on to HB 1997 relating to the inter-island transport of hydrogen. Chair's recommendation is to pass with that aforementioned defective date, and also incorporating the language provided by Life of the Land's testimony, basically inserting the word renewable as a requirement. It doesn't make much sense to provide a tariff that's going to be subsidized by other consumers if we're not providing some sort of climate benefit. And that's pretty much it. Members, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1997, noting the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa, are there any members wishing to vote with reservations or no? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
Thank you. Next, we're on to HB 2267. This has a few moving parts. The plan is to defer decision-making to our February 6th agenda. It'll be at the end of that agenda. Okay, moving on to HB 2071 relating to photo red light imaging detector systems. The only thing I have as a recommendation is inserting that defective date, and that'll create the HD1. Members, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. HB 2071, passing with amendments, noting the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa. Are there any members wishing to vote with reservations or no? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
All right, thank you. Moving on to HB 2673. So what we're going to do with this is create an HD1, inserting the defective date, but also what we're going to do is provide a little bit of language from the first bill on our agenda, which basically clarifies that in this money that would be given the flexibility to the counties to use their GE and fuel taxes for maintenance of private roadways. We would also include specific language that it would be including but not limited to flood mitigation as a possible use. So just that and the effective date. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 2673, passing with amendments, noting the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa. Are there any members wishing to vote with reservations or no? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
Thank you. So these next two measures, HB 1538 and 1539, are they're basically the same thing. There's some minor differences. We're going to use HB 1539 as the vehicle. So with that being said, HB 1538 will be deferred. HB 1539, we are going to defer decision-making to February 6th. I think there's probably some sort of balance to strike between updating these minimum coverages, which haven't been updated in a very long time, but also ensuring that we're not going to actually push people out of being insured entirely with rate increases. So that'll give us a few days to kind of work out some sort of balance there. So that'll be deferred till February 6th for decision making. The next bill on the agenda is HB 1577 relating to motor vehicle towing fees, which we had, sorry, go ahead. No, but we're going to have to do it another time. That's okay. Okay, for HB 1577, recommendation is to defect the date, and we are going to insert language capping the fees that can be charged by these towing companies, but we're going to leave that amount blank. So it'll be worked out over time. We received very little testimony on this measure outside of the expert testimony from DCCA. So at least in theory, in the Consumer Protection Committee, the industry and the regulators can both kind of weigh in on what would be a reasonable amount, but we'll give them that opportunity with this HD1. Okay.
Thank you,
Oh,
Chair.
sorry, members, any questions, comments? No, we're good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1577, voting to pass with amendments, noting the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa. Are there any members wishing to vote no or with reservations? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
Okay, the last measure on the agenda is HB 1578 relating to transportation. And this is with that proposed HD1. The Chair's recommendation is to adopt the proposed HD1 with a defective date. Members, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Voting on HB 1578, noting the excused absence of Representative Kitagawa. Are there any members wishing to vote with reservations or no? Seeing none, Chair, your measure is adopted.
All right, and we are adjourned. Thank you.